So first of all, good afternoon and welcome to our panel on policy recommendations to build human capital in the U.S. Japan Cybersecurity Alliance. We'll try to do this in a little bit more accelerated fashion so we can get back on schedule and leave time for questions and answers, which I know you really want to get to. First, my name is Joe Kelly. I will be your moderator. I am a professor of practice, meaning I'm a professional person. I'm not someone who went and actually did the pain of getting a PhD like Benjamin here did. But they recognized that my career meant something. So I'm at the University of Maryland's Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security. I previously served as a private sector cybersecurity consultant, and then was a cybersecurity official for the Department of Defense. I'm joined by three eminent professionals, Toshio Nawa, Robert Sheldon, and Simone Petrella, and I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves very briefly.
I'm Toshio Nawa. I'm from CyberVista and also located in Japan. I usually provide pen testing and data forensic investigations, and sometimes I support national police and military unit.
Robert Sheldon, Director of Public Policy and Strategy at the Mansfield. Robert Sheldon, Director of Public Policy and Strategy at Crowdstrike, and I was a Mansfield Fellow in 2013-2014.
Simone Petrella, founder, CEO of CyberVista. We're a cybersecurity workforce development and training company, and formerly cyber threat intelligence analyst for the Department of Defense.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we're going to try and get through, you heard all of the threats, all the risks, all the need for U.S. Japan cybersecurity collaboration. What we're going to talk to is present, first we're going to ask Toshio Nawa to give us a little presentation that will serve as a bridge between the previous panel and our recommendations. And then Simone, Rob, and I will go through the specific recommendations in our draft report. We'll run a little bit of intro before we get into that. I think the main theme that we want to emphasize going into this is ultimately when we get into the recommendations in our discussion, this is about capacity building in a joint context where we not only make sure that Japan and the United States can do more of human capital, but do more together and in a bilateral way that facilitates working across our two nations. So with that, and yes, we'll be using the podium a lot more so we don't juggle things in our lives.
Okay, thank you very much. In considering the nature of the human capital between the United States and Japan, I believe it's important to understand the organizational capabilities of each other. And in particular, Japanese organizations are very unique, I think you know, and particularly difficult to understand compared to the organization in the Western countries. I and my team are providing the pen test service and data forensic service to the Japanese organization as part of the security support. Sometimes I provide support to the on-site for incidents that have occurred and advise management on how to prevent recurrence and make improvement. I will share what my team have learned from this experience. So at a short speech, maybe 5 to 6 minutes, I will would like to talk about the environment of Japanese companies, and that's becoming the less awareness of the particularly environment and cybersecurity. Next slide, please. And first, there is a throwing responsibility to the person in charge. Until now, many Japanese organizations have used IT for operational efficiency, not for the business strategy. As a result, many executives have left IT issue to the information system department. Next slide, please. In Japan, there is an aspect of the cyber threat situation that makes it difficult to gain situational awareness. In particular, both companies and government can still make effort, but due to various factors, promotion of each effort is slow. Therefore, senior management lack of the environment of the raise security awareness through their own effort. Next slide please. In the different directions, most Japanese organizations still try to make countermeasure by development of organizational systems. Unfortunately, the preparation of the preconditions are still in the middle of the road. Next slide, please. As a symbolic issue, there is a security measure focused on the assurance of information set. The knowledge base for the IA information assurance effort is impressive, but the maturity level of the CND or competent for defense is limited because CND is often outsources to the local third parties. Next, please. Thank you. Lack of the imagination due to the lack of the social awareness is serious. The management of the Japanese organization have the great imagination for natural disasters, but their imagination of the cyber risk, which require their own effort and learning cost, is at a very low level. Next, please. And finally, the decision-making process is slow in the most of the aspects. There is true not only the peace times, but also after the cyber attack has occurred. Thus, when considering the human capital in the Japanese organization, it is necessary to make into account not only that human resource themselves, but also their operation organization, Chinese organizations. Thank you.
I'm not even going to pretend that I can lean down that far as to be able to talk. So, thank you, Toshio. Very valuable presentation. I think what you're hearing is a common theme here. You know, that presentation gives an excellent view into the specific challenges of how we work through understanding across large enterprises and the need for broader understanding and improving human capital at all levels in this arena. As panel one noted, I think you certainly heard the urgent need for greater U.S. Japan collaboration on cybersecurity. That collaboration is vital to the security and prosperity of both nations. And if we want to make that happen, human capital is the core asset necessary to make it possible. And because of that, that is what is the driving force behind all of our recommendations. Before we get into presenting what those recommendations are and talking about the joint capacity building that is so vital, I would like you to keep in mind 3 points as you listen to our recommendations. First and foremost, these are draft recommendations based on our collective experience and our deliberations. We want your input and ideas and broader input and ideas to make these recommendations better. We want them better and easier to implement. Where we use specific examples in the recommendations, these are merely starting points. We want those initial ideas to be changed and improved in order to deliver success for both nations. Second, our recommendations are designed to enable action now. Wherever people in government, industry, and academia in both the United States and Japan see an opportunity to implement a recommendation based upon existing relationships, we hope you will do so. So as you are engaged already, whether in industry or academia or government, and have an existing collaborative effort, we want to see those grow. Third and finally, as we go through the recommendations, we want you to understand that they are all designed to be mutually supportive. Any action taken under one recommendation is inevitably going to benefit any action taken in another recommendation. Thus, what we hope coming out of this, and when we get to the point where a final report is presented, we hope that individual institutions, ministries, and companies will take action. That as they do so, they will be aware of each other and able to self-organize collaboration in advance of more formal agreements or decisions in any context. And I'm not joking about the idea of if I had 10 million, I would give it to the Mansfield Foundation, precisely to continue and be that organization that can help bring together fora like this, bring together organizations to be able to further this a little bit forward. With that, we're going to go through our 8 recommendations in the draft report. I will start with the first 2, and then I will hand it off to Simone for the next 3, and then Rob will finish with the final 3, and then we will dive right into questions and answers. So our first recommendation of our 8 policy recommendations is that the United States and Japan alliance should borrow from the experience of Japanese companies in developing a base set of joint syllabi for the United States and Japan. Japanese companies have already developed syllabi to standardize cybersecurity workforce development in Japan's private sector, and these were based on the U.S. National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education's framework. This was developed over 10 years ago. I recall at the time it was first done in the United States government. It was a very valuable framework to the point of Toshio's presentation. It identified very different roles, recognizing that not everybody must be that security manager, but that there were specific roles to be done for HR, for training, for senior leaders to be effective. So a joint syllabi can go a long way to improving a wide range of cybersecurity perspectives. But drawing on that syllabi, we believe the United States and Japan should seek to encourage and establish double degree programs between Japanese and U.S. universities that would provide a master's degree awarded by both institutions that would occur on an accelerated timeline. And then in doing so, students would have the opportunity to study the same subject from 2 very different perspectives, gaining valuable knowledge from the 2 countries in order to become a key player in U.S.-Japan bilateral cybersecurity, so that we have people familiar working in both nations and being able to contribute. There have been past such programs in the past that are no longer in existence, but we'd like to see more of them happen. I think the key point here is to recall that to the extent that there are existing collaborations between universities on both sides of the Pacific, that we want to see those add this joint syllabi, add cybersecurity as an area of collaboration, if not yet as a dual degree program, then certainly we would hope it would move on to one fairly soon, particularly if there were support from other institutions. It would also benefit the students, and that would make them presumably more attractive to industry and government to be our key liaisons between. Recommendation number 2 is building on the notion of the joint syllabi, creating more double degree programs. We would encourage Japanese universities, working with an appropriate government agency, to develop and obtain the equivalent of a Center of Academic Excellence designation for universities. So the Center for Academic Excellence is a program run by the United States National Security Agency that certifies 3 lanes of effort around research, operations, and defense as part of syllabi and training at universities. There are hundreds of American universities that are in this program. The involvement of the NSA comes out of its origin as a protector of national security systems and running wider information security standards. But a similar program would not have to be by the same kind of agency as NSA, but a similar program in Japan that could begin providing a similar level of certification to Japanese universities would make it much easier then to establish relationships between universities on both sides, and there would be this common kind of arrangement. It would then encourage, hopefully study abroad between, partner universities working in this direction. We would only emphasize the computer network defense lane of the 3 types of certification that are currently offered in the United States as having the most benefit and the most approach. But again, there is an action there that we think if an analog can be developed in Japan, it would be most beneficial to do so. So those are our first 2 recommendations. So if I can ask you to come up and guess the next 3.
Thank you, Josh. So as it came to recommendation number 3, the working group also came to the conclusion that there should be an increased fostering of bilateral cooperation through initiatives like sister cities, where groups, whether they be state to state, university to university, company to company, government to government, could formalize and make deliberate programs that can foster not only shared cybersecurity resources and best practices, but particularly help foster an accelerant into the talent challenge. This could be everything related to the curriculum sharing. That's part of the idea of creating a joint syllabi in the first place. Student exchanges for academic settings, talent exchanges and resources, or other types of non-academic or professional opportunities that allow for that continued collaboration. The next, I think, is important as we think about the unique challenge in expanding the cybersecurity workforce and talent pool as we face this growing challenge. And as many of you are aware, that has become more acute year over year as the demand continues to increase and the supply does not. The starting point here is to standardize a language and create a lexicon that can be used by both countries to form a common baseline of understanding about the type of skills, knowledge, and abilities that are required to do cybersecurity work. A good starting point for something like this is found already in the United States through the NICE framework, which stands for the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. This could serve as a starting point to create that common lexicon that is unique to the way that both the US and Japan can talk about cyber work. But to make it even more relevant, Japanese employers and the US could continue to conduct job task analyses, meaning there needs to be an assessment done of the type of work that's actually required in cybersecurity roles, documented in a way that allows us to understand what those discrete competencies and abilities are, and then use that to map the workforce in a way that not only inventories the need, but allows us to have a set of profiles so that we know what these jobs really entail when we think about trying to match talent to it. Once you have that baseline, it provides the ability for both countries to actually establish a pathway, not only to get people or talent into those roles initially, but allow them to stay and progress in their careers as they accumulate and gain more experience in those skill areas. The fifth recommendation is based on once that idea of the needs are assessed, once we know what we actually need in the workforce, what are the talent demands of these roles, then the US and Japan should create a more cohesive and easily accessible training network of resources and offerings that could provide the full spectrum of foundational knowledge and theory of computing and cybersecurity principles, but more importantly, how those can be paired in actionable ways with more innovative learning methodologies that focus on the practical, whether that be scenario-based interactive training or other things that are grounded in the activities that people in this work find themselves in the real world. It's important in that context to also think about the stakeholders that we're trying to train when we think about the type of things that we want to expose our kind of burgeoning workforce to. And so to start with that, we always have to start with our decision makers, whether they be policymakers, whether they be C-suite executives or government leaders. And one of the most important tools in that capacity is often around scenario and tabletop-based planning as it comes to cybersecurity controls. So using and leveraging tabletops in a way to not only think about the outcomes that could potentially be contemplated in certain scenarios, but more importantly to prioritize the actions and initiatives that are going to be taken as a result of the learnings out of things like tabletops are incredibly important. Those are going to be different based on the audience that you're trying to actually target them to. Then when you start to get into application of knowledge, there are a number of discrete activities that could round out the type of skills that people acquire through knowledge-based learning, whether they be activity-based or specific outcome-based games, whether it be card games, simulation or range-like environments where the training outcome is actually meant to be accomplished in a specific environment and there is real-time feedback as to whether it's actually been occurred. And then more high-fidelity games, which is more persistent. The idea that once you actually are given a discrete set of skills, the learning doesn't stop there, and there needs to be an environment that there can be continuous stressing and exercising of that type of workforce as they continue to progress and meet the challenge that we have today. And in summary, when you think about all of those opportunities of how we can kind of take a knowledge of where we are with the roles needed and then the training that we actually have to provide them, the government, both the US and Japan, have not only a unique opportunity, but their companies have a unique opportunity to really streamline and share that language and that training in a way that can be used bilaterally across both nations. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob to close us out.
Our sixth recommendation is to better leverage online training and learning for essentially achieving scale. So we've all heard a lot of statistics about the extent to which cybersecurity requirements are expanding, and therefore unfilled jobs or vacancies are expanding. And there are a lot of initiatives, both in Japan and the United States, for creating tools to be able to reach scale, to train people in skill sets. Critically, not everybody who works in a cybersecurity role today, nor in the future, must have a four-year degree in some specific cybersecurity discipline. There are definitely scenarios, specific roles that can contribute to cybersecurity outcomes where a few months of applied training or even a few weeks of applied training can get somebody positioned to be able to start in a role where they can be contributing and then continue learning on the job once they've identified a role. So being able to focus on different initiatives and platforms that will at least help expose people to the basics, and people who probably aren't going to be on a track where they necessarily need to become a cybersecurity expert, although who knows, people may ultimately develop into that, but to be able to contribute value quite early on. Obviously, there are initiatives, as I mentioned, that are using these sort of techniques today, but the idea of leveraging international relationships and different requirements in Japan and the United States to identify overlaps and to be able to focus on those so that work can essentially be reused, and to be able to help train a cadre of people that are able to contribute to problems that we see in both nations. On that note, recommendation number 7 is to essentially expand that group of people who are acclimated to the problem set that people in Japan face from a cybersecurity perspective, sorts of problems, and in the United States, to be able to create more people that are oriented to those problems and are able to identify solutions and bring capabilities to bear. It is the case that there could be more cooperation, heightened cooperation, for contributing cybersecurity ideas. And notably, recently there's been an uptick in the amount of things like requests for comment on whether that's from a technical architecture type project or initiative, like the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology might be soliciting input for. Lots of companies are using similar documents to be able to identify people who can essentially cross-collaborate to inform the standards that are evolving from either Japan or the United States would help drive toward more similar outcomes and create easier pathways for people to be able to contribute in both places. Of course, there's also language barriers to such cooperation, and any initiatives that could help expose Americans to Japanese language skills and vice versa would help train people to be able to contribute in both areas. And then obviously, the work of nonprofits like the Mansfield Foundation and many others that are helping to train people, expose them to the ideas and thinking of leading practitioners in both countries would be helpful. And then the final recommendation number 8, which I'll spend just a little bit more time talking about, is to essentially identify all the different initiatives that are valued that are in the United States or in Japan, and critically initiatives where there's already some level of collaboration. And we've heard in our discussions with Japanese government officials over the past couple of days a lot about different exercises where it's common to find people from both countries. To try and identify those, the most valuable of those sorts of structures, and then to build up from the ones that are happening organically. Sometimes it's the case that we seek to create a new type of structure, we have a project or initiative, and then create that from whole cloth. It was created, just created because it seems like it would be a good idea, but very frequently the seed of actually impactful collaboration is already planted somewhere, and then to be able to identify those that are actually contributing and expand those. That might be through more attention, more participation, or more resources. And then to hopefully tend toward projects or initiatives that are, that are action oriented. So not just thinking about the types of projects or initiatives that might yield actionable recommendations or results, but try and tilt efforts toward things that are actually improving cybersecurity outcomes on the ground now. And by cybersecurity outcomes, I don't just mean defeating cyber threats, although that too, but an outcome might be a type of joint curriculum or a game that can take place periodically, that type of thing. There was some discussion earlier about Centers for Academic Excellence, and that type of structure is something that is also helpful because it can help train people, again, reaching scale. So thinking through ways to have coherent, coherent outcomes from those sorts of institutions that will go beyond the initial cohort of people that are involved. Trying to create pathways so that people who participate in these sorts of structures that we've identified will go on, contribute for a long period of time, train others, and so on. And then finally, I'd be remiss probably if I didn't identify at least a few key themes that came up in many meetings that we've had just over the past couple of days, because some of these themes might be the types of areas that we should identify, that we identified that we should probably invest in because there's a chance to make them impactful. So one, there's been some progress in the last year, in particular in the United States, on the issue of incident reporting, so that government can have, in the case of the United States, CISA can have a more holistic view about different types of attacks on critical infrastructure. And that's the type of thing that Japan would have a comparable interest, and it's an area where there's probably fruitful to have a wide variety of stakeholders contributing ideas and best practices for implementing that type of thing. A second one is supply chain security, and I can say that United States experts are focused on this problem set very explicitly right now because there's been some high-profile incidents and campaigns, attacks along these lines that have leveraged software supply chain vulnerabilities to compromise many victims. And some of the experts that we spoke with in Japan, I know, are focused very intently on this problem set as well. It's a difficult problem. It will not, unfortunately, will likely not be solved by the time the next group of experts convene. And then Akane-san from the previous panel mentioned with her $100 million grant program the use of initiatives that can help improve cybersecurity for small businesses. And this is a thing that came up in a lot of the different meetings that we've had over the past number of days, and it also is a type of problem that we face in the United States. So it is a case that over the past number of years, large enterprises or institutions have really increased the extent to which they can provide good cybersecurity services at the big enterprise level, but small enterprises still, because achieving that level of security maturity is difficult. They still have challenges essentially getting best-in-class type cybersecurity solutions, and therefore having a strong cybersecurity posture. And by that I also mean access to training and expertise. I will stop there.
Thank you to both Rob and Simone for closing that out. All right, we are now back by my watch on schedule, so we have time to do some questions and answers. I will sort of close our presentation with one key point. The fundamental theme is we know both nations have a need for much more cybersecurity capacity. Anybody working in this business, everyone here on stage, lives this on a current daily basis of trying to find trained people to support their work. It's one of the most difficult things we face. We know both countries need more people. We want to promote recommendations that will allow both countries to increase that capacity, but do so on a bilateral basis so that we can do much more together. So with that, let me open the round to questions. I'll ask my panelists to help hand the microphones over to our other panel one members at the front table. We have Kelly here going around with the mobile mic. So please raise your hands and I'll recognize you for questions. I guess we'll start over here in the middle. So please identify yourself.
Thank you for the lovely discussion. I'm Christopher Tate with Connect Creek Corporation. And I was just wondering that in the discussion, I understand the need for more of the human touch, and obviously there's a lot that we can still do with the current technology. But the DoD and obviously, what is it, Biden-Harris administration, NSIT came out with the Zero Trust framework. And I was kind of curious why there wasn't really kind of any hint of zero trust in today's conversation.
Sorry, just so I'm clear, the question is why is there more conversation about zero trust?
That's correct,
in this panel? Yeah, so we wanted to focus our efforts here not just on a particular type of cybersecurity technology or solution. Some of us, so myself included, would be happy to talk about zero trust until we're blue in the face, but the initiative here was mainly focused on like structures, processes, and programs that we could use, not any specific type of cybersecurity technologies or practices.
I think the other thing to keep in mind when you're talking about building capacity of human talent for cybersecurity is that zero trust is a framework of a way for us to approach security, and the controls that we put in place are what is different. But what you need to produce people who are capable of implementing zero trust are people who understand the fundamentals of networking, computing, and the principles of security so that they can actually take that framework and then put it into action. So if we're not capable of building out a workforce that understands those first initial foundations, we won't be able to achieve zero trust.
We'll get some other first.
Hi, I'm Toshio Nawa from Google Japan. Not a technical expert, but a policy person. And also a proud graduate of Todai and Princeton. So if you say workforce, it could range from like experts in the government, experts in the private sector, senior management, or even individuals or small businesses. So if we were to prioritize which group of workforce we train, which do you think will give the sort of the most effective cybersecurity as a country as a whole, and would that be different from between Japan and the United States?
Interesting. Who wants to?
And I think you mentioned about university, but putting university aside, other than universities.
Who wants to take a first shot at that one? Anyone?
Let somebody actually in tech do it, but
I mean, I'll take another stab at that one too. I think that speaks to the sixth recommendation in particular that Rob talked about, but when we looked at the unique nature of both Japan and the US, I think one of the most efficient ways to prioritize training is actually to focus on, there's kind of the all, right? There's the entire population of everyone who needs to be good in cyber hygiene, has to understand the principles so that they're not victims to attacks. There's the many, which are people who are involved in IT roles, software development, engineering, that don't have cybersecurity necessarily as a pure play of their role, but it is a critical component of what they do. And then there's the few that are ultimately responsible for defense of those networks. If you're talking biggest bang for your buck, my personal belief is that you have to go for the many, right? How do you think about the type of training that you can deploy against the population responsible for IT infrastructure, configurations of networks, software development in a secure way from a manufacturing perspective, so that those types of vulnerabilities are addressed before they actually have to go to that population of the few who are ultimately responsible for either mitigating or responding to cyber attacks. And the reality is most of that population is either coming out of academic environments because they're being trained in universities, or they're already in the workforce, and therefore companies have a responsibility to kind of prioritize their training.
I'll sort of jump on top of that as well. When the NICE framework was developed over 10 years ago, it was a recognition that you did not want to try and turn everybody into a computer science expert. And that when you said you're a policy person, as am I know just enough to get into trouble on the technical details of this stuff. And, you just blow me away on anything, technical here, to be sure. The point was, it recognized the need for a level of expertise in an individual role. And I think, I agree with Simone that the real point is not to prioritize one group, but to drive total culture in that regard. And I think to your second part of the question about the differences between the US and Japan, I think witness the mere fact that Japanese companies took the nice framework and actually then started developing real syllabi around it. Whereas in the United States, when this first came up in our conversations, we're like, oh, I remember that. What do we do with that? So we moved on to the next thing. So I think the difference in culture is that, and we discussed this in our discussion, the deliberations, was Japan is very good at turning these things into structured outcomes, and I think also has a culture that makes it easier to drive a culture of security. Whereas in the United States, we're always turning to who can I outsource my problem to, and I think, Toshio, your presentation perfectly captured it, but leadership just wants to outsource it, not my problem. So I think that's really kind of where the answer is. Any others on the panel?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I do a lot of work in diversity in general, and whenever I talk about diversity, I always talk about it's not about diversity of gender or race or sexual preference only, it's diversity of mindset. And I think this topic of the relevance of U.S. Japan working together is profound when it comes to really intermingling diversity of mindset, which is one of the amazing things that the Mansfield Foundation has done, is to bring a diverse group of people together around this. Because I know you can't see this, but I have a slide here that's diversity of industry, diversity in industry, but you can see a lot of plots of bubbles on here. And the point about this is that it isn't an IT thing. Cybersecurity is a interoperable, the term that Tamara used, functional aspect. It's a placemat on which you put all the plates and the cutlery and the utensils of how you drive an organization forward. But in addition to that, and going back to your zero trust question, I'll blend it together, I think one of the biggest challenges that Japan has, that perhaps US is different from a cultural perspective, because we are talking about people, is that Japan as a culture doesn't come inherently from a zero trust mindset. Just taking the word zero trust. Japan comes from an implicit trust mindset, unlike the United States, and this is something that we were talking about the other day. So I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we have to have, is that you have to change mindset, but the way you change mindset is bring different perspectives into the room to understand how it's going to be relevant. And the only way that any training or education sticks is for people to understand how it's relevant to them, and what the impact of not doing something is much more dangerous and ominous than doing something.
Shouldn't talk.
Please come. Yeah. I think this is not a direct answer to you, but a few years ago, I visited to the Cycon U.S. in this area. So I met some round corporal. It's not sergeant. The speech in this Cycon is the Cycon U.S. is the U.S. Army Cyber Institute hold that event. Then one of the speakers is Sergeant Major of the Cyber Command, U.S. Army Cyber Command. But some round corporal, Gocho-san, less below to the sergeant, we talked at the lunchtime. Then he said, I asked him, why do you join in this event? Round corporal, not sergeant, not officer, but he said he wanted to have some career path through the cyber command career. So he had a postgraduate level education and go into the cyber command, and he will have some real war against another country. Then he retired from the army, and he gets some new job in the business. This is the ecosystem in the US. But in Japan, we don't have such kind of ecosystem now. So we will now strengthen that our cyber command in the self-defense force. Then I hope we would have such kind of ecosystem in Japan, so that the capability and such kind of capacity will be improved. Thank you.
General Tanaka, you will make your colleagues in the self-defense forces cry when they have to see, E5s being bid away by industry because of their training. Okay, other questions? Someone has not asked a question before? Over here.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for the wonderful session today. I work for a Japanese general trading company in charge of cybersecurity policy development and cybersecurity operations. Currently, I'm on secondment to NISC, the Japanese National Cybersecurity Agency, where I'm in charge of mainly the awareness raising of cybersecurity for corporate executives in the private sector and human resource development initiative. I am actually in the process of applying the master's program in cybersecurity risk management in the United States. We'll be starting next fall. Therefore, I'd like to ask Mr. Nawa, a question about human resource development and about cybersecurity that is similar to today's topic. At the present, not many Japanese go to the United States to study for higher education in cybersecurity, especially for specialized education in cybersecurity governance and risk management. So what specific efforts do you think would be effective in the short term to further promote human resource development and educational efforts in cybersecurity between the United States and Japan, especially in the private sector? So personally, I can think of the establishment of the governmental scholarship program for study in the United States. What do you think?
My short answer is experience. Experience is very important. I have another job, space security, under the cabinet office, and the U.S. and Japanese military officers yearly have the TTX for space securities. And after that, I got the interview, and they good experience, including the studying knowledge and studying each other's relationship, everything. But if just study the knowledge from the book and internet site, it's very limited. The experience is very important, I think. So especially senior management and government officer is needed to have the experience.
And thank you for being one of our bridge builders. You fit perfectly into our recommendations, so there is action happening already. Over here, please.
Hello, my name is Nursultan Yildosun. I'm from the U.S. Embassy in the political section, and thank you everybody for joining us. Taking a step back, we're focused a lot on the cybersecurity personnel and trainings and awareness. How do we ensure, and which recommendations would you put forward on informing our public, the general public, on understanding the basics of cybersecurity? So I think they'll put positive pressure on governments and private security, or private sector companies, but also it'll create interest, whether it be high school students, whether it be college students. So I'm just curious to hear your perspectives on how do we ensure the public is better aware of cybersecurity, and not just when there's a ransomware attack or when there's something that big happened. Thank you.
Okay, who would like to answer that one? I'll take first stab, or Ben,
I'll say something.
Go for it.
Something. So, I mean, actually, interestingly, this is an area where I've seen Japan actually be much more creative than the U.S. So we're talking about lessons. We're always talking about what can Japan learn from the U.S. And I actually think that you can learn from Japan on this one. So one of my favorite moments in Japan, because I studied this stuff, is walking out of the train station in Harajuku and looking up, and there's this giant poster done like a girls comic, right? And it had like some very stereotypical line, but it had been changed to say, "Such a weak password does not suit you," right? But it was enormously memorable, right? Like, I still remember that. And you know, they do all these great events where, like, they do these crossover events with, you know, anime characters, right? You can come and see the person cosplaying your favorite anime character and the person who's, you know, the voice actor on it, and also meet someone from NIST who will tell you about cybersecurity, right? So like, they've been very creative on the Japan side, and also just having things like sort of information models in classrooms and things like that, right? I mean, there's much more outreach I've seen from the Japanese side than I have from the US side in terms of educating the public about this stuff. The Homeland Security Department in the US does have like some posters you can download if you go to their website. They are not fun. They are not creative. So I think in this particular case, there's actually somewhere where the US could learn from Japan and think more creatively about how do we sort of, you know, come up with ways to do this. Maybe do a crossover with Mr. Robot, which is one of my personal favorites in terms of shows about cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think in the United States, we just sort of lack a good public service announcement game, period. Rob, you had a comment?
I'll just add briefly, I do think that there are some longstanding public awareness campaigns in the United States, like Stop and Connect and things like that. I think that those are good to invest in, and I think, as my colleague pointed out, there's probably ways that we could do better. I think there's a couple other things to keep in mind. One, I've seen a lot of effort on the US side, particularly in the last couple of years, of getting charismatic leaders in high roles and amplifying messages that they have. Sometimes these are folks that are, you know, not traditional cybersecurity practitioners, but people who are good messengers. And I think that, you know, having like identifying people who are compelling storytellers and having them say, like, I've had a successful career in cybersecurity, you can too, has been something that, you know, already has had an impact and will probably continue to as people who are in school right now and thinking about their careers select that over time. The final point is, I do sometimes worry that we over-index on public awareness, so that, which is to say that we have an expectation that everyone's going to become a cybersecurity expert. From my point of view, it'd be great if there was more general awareness about cybersecurity. We should not use that to absolve platforms and enterprises, people that have the ability to make design decisions, things like secure software coding or using best practices for how to authenticate, things like that, or making things more secure by default. There's a number of ways that organizations can do that. And we shouldn't essentially blame victims if they're getting hacked into from time to time. At a certain point, there's a problem in how industry presents digital services to people that needs to be fixed. So I think that we need to do a better job of making sure that people who are offering platforms are offering them in ways that are more secure by default.
I believe I have another question here in the middle. Yes, just so now in front of you first, and then I'll come back to you.
Hi, my name is Mihoko Matsubaran from NTT. Thank you so much for your insights and congratulations on publishing your recommendations. So I understand that you've been talking to different Japanese business people and government officials here, and I'm sure that you will be talking to Washington DC community people moving forward. And I'm wondering how you would make your recommendations into actions from the Japanese and the US government in the future. Thank you.
Who wants to take a first shot at that? Someone who maybe hasn't heard an opinion yet? Noguchi-san, come on. I'll start by saying I think part of the intent when we put the report out, the Mansfield Foundation publishes it, is one, the opportunity for people to take action on their own. So, pointing to our colleague over here who is already pursuing the kind of thing we want to see. When we get to final recommendations, the expectation and hope is that enough interest in industry, academia, and government on both sides will have hit a critical mass that we would see something more formal follow in terms of decisions and pilot projects, but we are too early in the process to even suggest that we're necessarily going to get there. Does anyone else have a thought? Noguchi-san, please.
Thank you for the question. We are part of the whole group. We actually visited many places, including government and the K-Government and other professional group. And we recognize that there are good feedbacks, positive feedbacks, and we have the confidence to implement, but that's not enough.
and the government to government, and the industry to industry, and the government to government. Mansfield Foundation is communicating with the politicians level, congressional level, and to make sure to support by every layer, including here, embassy, and to make sure that good things are coming and getting a lot of feedbacks as well. And your productive feedbacks are welcome to get into the action plan so that we can do meaningful implementation. So there are a lot of discussion happening last 72 hours, perhaps, but just beginning.
Okay, we'll do our last question back here. Oh, sorry, Frank, go ahead.
I'm going to get a chance to speak in a moment, but I'm Frank Januzzi. I'm president of the Mansfield Foundation, and your question is a critical one because wonderful ideas without follow-through are just, eggs sort of laying in the grass. So we will be attempting to inculcate both the norms and values with the people we're speaking to, but also to catalyze action. And our approach is going to be multidimensional and multi-layered. So we will be making efforts to promulgate our recommendations to government, but not just like government, Diet, members of Congress, appropriate executive branch agencies in both places, but also critically private sector leaders and thought leaders. And I will just pay a compliment to NTT. My own situational awareness about cyber really began with discussions with NTT officials who were visiting Washington a couple of years ago. So already, your company is playing a role in helping to generate interest and energy, to try to implement some of these good ideas, we hope. And we look to partners like NTT as critical participants in the process. The Mansfield Foundation is a very tiny foundation whose purpose essentially is to convene and to bring together outside expertise. But in terms of implementation, we rely on the program participants themselves to sort of take the ideas out and back to their ecosystems and help to affect change.
Okay, we'll go to our last question and to Frank for closing remarks, please.
Sorry to take the floor again. This is not a question. Just going back to the public awareness. Maybe we should ask our Miss colleague to articulate. In Japan, we have Cybersecurity Awareness Month that starts from February 1st to March 18th, if I remember correctly. So that is, I think, and actually most of the countries have their own Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I think in the United States it's like October or something. And so Google is planning to have some campaign events and also launch a digital course on cybersecurity. I think it was one of your recommendations, online scaling courses. So Google Japan is happy to contribute to the public awareness part of this initiative. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Frank. I will turn it over to you, I guess, for our closing remarks. And then I believe we do have the room until 4:30 if people want to mingle, talk with any panel members, so please feel free.
Thank you, Joe. So I am Frank Januzzi. I'm president of the Mansfield Foundation, and I won't attempt to summarize today's conversation, but as a non-expert in cyber issues, I just wanted to share a few of my key takeaways from today's presentation. And I want to hearken back to Maureen Mansfield. Maureen Mansfield, the wife of Ambassador Mike Mansfield, was the inspiration for him to pursue education. Mike Mansfield was a high school dropout who left school at age 14 to join the Navy. Then he joined the Army, then the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps sent him to Asia, where he fell in love with Asia and became a lifelong believer in the importance of the Asia-Pacific region to the future of the United States. But it was Maureen Mansfield who said to Mike Mansfield, "I won't marry you if you don't go back to school and get an education." and she paid for his education and sent him back to college, and he got a BA degree and a master's degree, and he became a successful politician and national leader and ambassador. I mentioned Maureen Mansfield because we need people who are able to catalyze action in the cyber field. And the success of anyone operating in this field is going to be magnified if the field is full of diverse voices and diverse points of view and perspectives. So we need women in cybersecurity. We need multinational U.S. Japan cooperation in cybersecurity. And one of my key takeaways is coming from Simone's point about many versus the few. But we need to inculcate awareness of the importance of cyber broadly in society, not just among those who are charged ultimately in trying to remedy or respond to cyber attacks. As to why cyber matters, I think it's obvious, but maybe if it's not obvious, we should deny everyone access to their TikTok, their Netflix, their online banking, and their emails for 24 hours. I think many of us don't fully appreciate the extent of our reliance upon secure communications and secure IT platforms until we are denied it. And as soon as it goes away, we scream a bloody murder. I'm not really suggesting that that's the best way for the US government to convince people that cyber matters, to shut down all of our cyber access for a day, but sometimes I feel like people need a wake-up call. I'm struck by the fact that cyber is not just an important field in and of itself, but frankly it undergirds everything else. Security in the military realm, industrial security, public health, finance, communications, space, all of it depends upon the integrity of the systems and defense from cyber attack. And another key takeaway I get from today's discussion is that the defense of the cyber realm is not about building a wall. It's not about trying to build an unbreachable wall. It's really about resiliency. It's as much about how you respond to cyber attacks as it is to preventing them, but it's a multi-layered, it's everything from denial and deterrence, but then to attribution and to recovery and response and resiliency. And I think that in order to do that, you need that human capital, but you need it at many layers. You need it among the many in terms of their practices. You need it among the relatively few in terms of those who are going to be charged with defending the systems, and then the elite few who are going to be the spear point in responding to attacks. I learned a new acronym. I'm not sure if it was used, but IRMA, I'm going to call it IRMA, Information Revolution in Military Affairs, IRMA. That scares me a little bit, General. I'm slightly less confident. I'm a little more pessimistic than you. But I think you're right that this information of revolution in military affairs is coming, if it's not already here. And it's going to make the world a very interesting place indeed, as we have autonomous killing machines and AI and all kinds of things happening in the battle space that are going to depend upon resilient cyber security systems. All the more reason why the US and Japan need to be really closely linked. And the final point I have brings me back not to Maureen Mansfield, but to Mike Mansfield and to Julianne's excellent opening remarks at today's conference, which is to say that in this area of cybersecurity, as in so many others, the wisdom of Ambassador Mike Mansfield is proven to be true when he said that the US-Japan relationship was the most important bilateral relationship in the world, bar none. This is a motto that Mansfield Fellows like Rob learn. We preach it to them when they become Mansfield Fellows. But there is no more important partnership in the world in terms of norm setting, in terms of capacity, in terms of sharing of our capacity with the developing world, Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific, than the US-Japan partnership. It's absolutely essential. And it's essential not only because we represent close to 40% of global GDP, it's essential because of what we are capable of doing when we put our minds to it, to create public goods and propagate international norms. And that's part of what this field is all about. It's not just about laws or capacity, but it's also about setting norms and standards and behaviors that we hope will make the world a safer and more prosperous and secure place for all of us. I want to express my deep appreciation to the members of the U.S. Japan Cyber Workforce Group that Mansfield Foundation has convened. I want to thank Julian Dosher, the program manager, Kelly Primrose, the program manager who helped to conceive this project with support from the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, Ayako Saeki from our program manager here in Tokyo from the Mansfield office, and all the staff of the Mansfield Foundation, both here in Tokyo and in Washington, D.C., for their support for this program. I want to thank all of you for spending 2 hours with us on a Friday afternoon that has been, is it not Friday? No. It's only Tuesday. It seems like it should be Friday. It should be Friday already. It's only Tuesday. I'm a little jet lagged. I think I arrived on Sunday. I think it was Sunday. But I want to thank all of you for spending a couple of hours with us on a Tuesday afternoon at Todai, and thank Todai for their wonderful host services for the Mansfield Foundation that's been working here. I don't know, I'm sure I have forgotten others, including Joe Kelly and Rika Nakazawa for moderating the 2 panels, and all the members of our group. But with that, I will say, domo arigatou gozaimasu, and we are adjourned. Thank you so much.